Well, Paul, even for you, this is quite impressive. Welcome, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Jeffrey Howard. I served with Paul on the Marin County bench for nearly 9 years and counted him as my dear friend. I made the mistake of writing down everything I wanted to say about Paul before I asked about time limits. So I've condensed 13 hours, 9 minutes down to hopefully less than 10 minutes. I first met Paul when Deborah Briner arranged a lunch to introduce me to him after I had applied for a judicial appointment. We instantly became fast friends, as so many do who meet him for the first time. Starting a few months later, as his colleague and friend, I talked with Paul almost every day for over 8 years. I don't know anyone who brought such joy, passion, enthusiasm, and humor every day. Now, it would probably be a better eulogy to say that had I known on that first day that we met that I'd be here, not even 12 years later, I would have cherished every moment with him more. But I can't lie for the sake of a good eulogy. The truth is that from the moment I met Paul, I realized what a kind, generous, brilliant, and rare person he was. And I did cherish every moment I spent with him. I'm grateful to Amy and Hannah in particular for taking such incredible care of him. Hannah, Nicole, and Kendall, I'm sorry that we really only got to know each other this way, but know that he spoke of you with such pride almost every time we talked. Hannah, I have so admired your strength, poise, and love. Paul talked about you incessantly before and after he got sick, and now I know why. Paul was an accomplished and brilliant person and judge. As district attorney, he served as the chief of the Child Abuse Sexual Assault Unit, the Domestic Violence Unit, the Computer Crimes Unit, and the Felony Trial Team, handling over 50 jury trials. Along the way, earning 2 Meritorious Service Awards for his work in child abuse cases and for his work in the community, an Award of Excellence for handling high-profile cases, and a Children's Champion Award. He was invited to teach trial advocacy at his alma mater, the University of San Francisco Law School, where, by the way, he twice earned the American Jurisprudence Award. And for 30 years, he volunteered as a coach and then judicial coordinator for the Marin High School mock trial competition. As a judge, he served as our presiding judge and as supervisor of both the civil and criminal departments. He had an unparalleled reputation for integrity, fairness, and empathy. As a colleague, he would always volunteer to help. I even learned to be careful about asking him questions. I once asked him if he knew the answer to a legal question, and we discussed it without resolving it. Late that night, he emailed me the results of what must have been 4 hours of research on that question, attaching several cases that he discussed in detail. And in a similar vein, Andy Sweet tells the story of a much younger Paul before they were judicial colleagues and when they barely knew each other at a Southern California airport about to take the same flight home. Apparently, Andy and his wife got bumped from the flight they were supposed to share with Paul, but after having already checked their luggage. Paul being Paul, he insisted on waiting for their bags when he arrived on the earlier flight, then driving them to Andy's house so Andy wouldn't have to wait for his bags at the airport. There are thousands of similar stories. Although he began his career as a scientist before attending law school, he was a sharp, incisive writer. I know this because he would make me proofread his more complex opinions. He approached his opinions the same way he approached his videos and his friendships, by pouring everything he had into them. By the third or fourth time reviewing one of these tomes, I complained that he was wasting my time. I once spent 3 hours carefully reading a 65-page opinion over which he had labored for weeks, only to find one small typo. He finally confessed that he really wanted to prove he had no typos. And we laughed about that epic failure. Paul worked harder than anyone on the bench. I know this because he would tell me so. He once had a case that required him, at least he decided it required him, to review thousands of lengthy spreadsheets. The resulting opinion, crafted over many weeks, ran over 50 pages. Every day, he would come sailing into my chambers, ostensibly to ask a question about some detail, but, as I would tease him, more likely to make sure that I knew how many thousands of spreadsheets he had reviewed. I joked with him that a better judge might find a way not to review every single spreadsheet. But I knew that any kind of perceived shortcut simply was not in Paul's character. He loved the work, and he loved having turned over every stone, some of them several times. For over a decade and a half, Paul stood as the most shining judicial example, not just on our bench, but across the state. I thought I would share with you Paul's own prescient words from his successful application to the governor for appointment to the bench in 2006 about how Paul saw his own judicial role. Paul wrote, quote, "As a judge, I will always strive to improve society. I will fairly, ethically, and honestly judge all cases while treating all parties with dignity and respect. I hope to help in the rehabilitation effort of those who can become productive members of society. I will also continue in my efforts to educate our youth by teaching at local high schools and law schools and participating in mock trial and other programs. I will make certain that my courtroom is an accessible and respectful place where people will feel welcome and where litigants will feel heard, understood, and respected." Close quote. As usual, Paul has described himself as a judge better than anyone else could. Paul fulfilled all of these promises and more. But you don't need to take my word for it. For those of you who don't know, when a trial judge makes a final decision or has a trial, the parties can appeal that to the Court of Appeals. There, 3 justices decide if we trial judges got it right or wrong. The courts of appeal, who reviewed Paul's work most closely, praised him repeatedly. In one case, involving a particularly cutting-edge issue, the court said, and here I am quoting from the actual Court of Appeals opinion, quote, "Judge Haakenson issued his statement of decision, and what a statement it was. 73 pages of detailed and comprehensive analysis," close quote. In reciting the factual background in that case, the Court of Appeals opted for this approach. They said, quote, "And because we cannot set forth the facts here any better than Judge Haakenson did, we quote extensively from his statement of decision to tell that story," close quote. And that is followed in the Court of Appeals opinion by literally 15 pages of direct quotation lifted from Paul's incisive opinion, minus the one typo I found. The judges and attorneys in the room know that such praise literally never happens, only with Paul. So our community was incredibly lucky to have him as a judge, but even more so as a friend and colleague. I spent a lot of time thinking about what made Paul so special to virtually everyone who knew him. I realized, looking back from the first day I met Paul and then over the course of thousands of conversations, that one thing never changed. In every single one of them, without exception, we laughed. We laughed. And judging is serious business, and yet Paul always found a reason to laugh, often at himself. We would poke fun at each other, had ongoing arguments, for example, that the other person was the better judge. I sure wish I didn't get the last word on that one here, but we would always laugh. Paul's laugh was sudden, lighting up his whole face, his eyes twinkling at the joy of finding a joke, a reason to see the world with humor. It was one of his greatest gifts, and it always made my chats with Paul the highlight of my day. Then I thought about why Paul had this quality of humor, of laughter. It's easy to say he just had a great sense of humor, which of course he did, but I think it stems from an even more fundamental aspect of Paul's character. He had this endless capacity for joy and positivity in everything he did, with every person he met, whether it was his best friend or the most destitute, drug-addicted person in his court. He saw the bright side. He embraced everyone with equal enthusiasm, seeing them with open eyes and ears for who they were. And when you see the world that way, it's easy to find a reason to laugh. There's a famous saying that adversity does not build character, it reveals it. So too with Paul. I'll always remember one of the last conversations I had with Paul. The cancer had affected his brain to the point where he didn't really make a lot of sense. But that didn't stop us from sitting outside by his pool, enjoying each other's company, admiring his backyard that he so loved. On that particular day, Paul had decided that he would award me, as he phrased it, a permanent, irrevocable 24/7 pass to access his house and use it however I please. The pool, the man cave, whatever. When Amy got home that day, he made sure to tell her too that I had this permanent 24/7 access. Of course, it was silly and nonsensical, but it also revealed, even in his sickness, his character, the depths of Paul's love, generosity, and loyalty he felt and showed to all of his friends. And I guess it will be convenient some days to grab a glass of orange juice on my way to work. A woman came up to me after Paul had passed and told me a story that many years ago she appeared before Paul as a self-represented litigant. One thing led to another, and as he ruled in her favor, he told her that she should consider going to law school and becoming a lawyer. Now, thanks to Paul, she is one, and she and I laughed about that. Paul, your legacy will live forever, not just in our hearts, but in the thousands of lives you touched in your personal and professional life. Godspeed, my friend.
Good evening, everybody. I will try not to repeat too much of what Judge Howard just said, but this isn't going to surprise you. There's going to be a lot of overlap, I think, tonight among the speakers, because I don't know anybody who would ever have anything negative to say about Paul, or anybody that had anything but positive and wonderful interactions and experiences with him. So I met Paul in 1990 as a 1L at USF, and he was my dear friend also for 35 years before cancer took him away. Paul was Haak to us. That's what we called him in law school. Everybody had abbreviated names or nicknames, and so if you hear Haak tonight, that's Paul. And there are many, many of our classmates here, many who have traveled from far away, and I think that that speaks to the deep and enduring impact that Paul had on everyone who knew him in law school. Everyone who knew Paul loved him. Now granted, being the most beloved among a bunch of lawyers isn't a high bar, but Paul was the exception. Because he was truly, as everybody in this room knows, one of the most wonderful people you could know. Now, I knew I liked Paul right away because he was telling corny dad jokes in his early 20s. He's like one of those progressive commercials. So when I first met him in law school, you do your usual small talk. Where'd you go to undergrad, et cetera? Where do you live, et cetera? Apparently, in that chit chat, I forgot to ask Paul where he was from. So Paul said to me, at some point, aren't you going to ask where I'm from? I thought, that's kind of weird. Okay, where are you from? He says, Covina. And he knew right away. I had no idea where Covina was. It could be in Kansas for all I know. And then he gets that smirk, that Paul smirk. He says, you going to ask me where that is? Okay, where's Covina? And he says, why, that's just east of West Covina. I said, Paul, it's a really dumb joke. And he looked at me and said, I know, I love it. And right then I knew Paul was somebody who I was going to be dear friends with. And Paul was, not surprisingly, as Jeff has already mentioned, one of the smartest in our law school class. He received 2 AmJur awards, as noted, and those are basically for non-law school folks here, the highest grade or the most outstanding. I don't know exactly what it's for. I didn't get one. Mine were lost in the mail or given to my sister Paula, who was, by accident, who was also in our law school class. But Paul received the award in property not once, but twice. And that's because Paul was the rare property student who actually knew what the rule against perpetuities was, which is this esoteric legal concept that will put you to sleep. But he tried to help others in the class. So if you didn't know it, you went to Paul to try and see if he could explain it to you. So I like to think that this is where I may have helped Paul become a good dad to him. Because your dad had practice when he tried to explain the rule against perpetuities to me of explaining something patiently as if to a child. So Hannah, I hope you benefited from that because I didn't. Paul loved his friends. He loved getting everybody together in law school. He organized crabbing trips to Dillon Beach, trips to Fallen Leaf Lake. In our law school group, we still talk about that to this day, and I know we will till the end of our days because they were some of our fondest times. And as everybody here knows, Paul went on to be a deputy district attorney after school, and I'm sure there are many Marin County former and current DDAs here, and there are many fantastic and amazing lawyers in that office, but I dare say Paul was as good as anybody that office ever had. And as a young deputy district attorney, I also followed in his path, although in a different county. And Paul was always, as he was for Judge Howard, an amazing source for me. He was somebody I could call and trust if I needed to bounce something off him, needed some advice, had a difficult case and wanted to just chew on an issue with somebody. Paul was always there for me. Like Paul, I also ended up becoming a judge, but again, elsewhere. And again, I did use Paul as my number one resource, just as Judge Howard did. And he never once failed to either take my call or return it if he was not there. He was always a source for me of information and help and just support throughout my career. And I'm truly going to miss that. It was such a wonderful thing to be able to know that I could call Paul, and whether he had the answer or not, as has been pointed out, he would find it for you and he would get back to you without fail. Now, as I prepared for tonight, it struck me that there weren't a lot of calls in the opposite direction from Paul to me. But I'm sure that's because he thought I was really busy. And he was so considerate that he just wouldn't want to take my time. So now you're going to hear lots of stories tonight you already have, and how wonderful Paul was. But believe it or not, every once in a while, Paul exercised some judgment that was a little questionable. For example, he invited me on his honeymoon. So Paul and Caroline, when they first got married, Caroline worked for a cruise company. and they went on a cruise for their honeymoon, but the ship caught on fire. It was either the first or second night. They literally had to abandon ship. And so, to make it up to them, they got another free cruise. And you would think that they would give them like the presidential suite or dinner with Captain Stubing or something. I don't go on cruises. That's still the only one I've ever been on. But no, they said you can take friends. So Paul invited me. And I was like, you want me to go on your honeymoon with you? And a typical Paul reaction, it's free. Okay, well that makes it okay. So the picture that's rolling through here that you may have seen at some point, there's two guys in tuxedos by a hot tub with cigars, and that's Paul and I on Paul's honeymoon. To make matters worse, I roomed with Paul on that honeymoon. Yeah, that's because Caroline brought her sister Jill, which that makes some sense, right? You know, your sister, your lifelong friend, et cetera, but maybe taking your drinking buddy from law school is not the best idea. But we had a great time, and we will never forget that. Another instance of Paul, you know, we've talked a lot about, Jeff mentioned Amy, and I will as well, and how lucky Paul was to have Amy at his side, and that Amy is a doctor, because Paul wouldn't have been a great doctor, I don't think. I think that may be the only thing, maybe, that he couldn't have done. Now, he would have had unbelievable bedside manner because he was so intelligent and compassionate, but I'm not sure about his ability to diagnose. So, in law school, we played a lot of softball together. We had a team that played for years and years and years. And one night, I got knocked out cold. So, don't need to tell you about that part of the story, but it happened. And so I got up and kind of wobbled around the outfield, and when the inning was over, thankfully nothing was hit to me, and I went into the dugout, and Paul came up to me, and he put his hands on my shoulders and kind of tapped me, and he looked at me. And it was the time we were studying for the bar at that point, so we would study all day, and then do God knows what at night, and then go study again the next day. And so Paul looked at me and said, "Okay, Finney, what did we study today?" I said, "I don't know." So he got a little concerned. But, you know, frankly with me, that could have been my answer if I got knocked out for nothing. So Paul asked me an easier question. "Okay, Finney, what day is it?" And I don't know what I said, but I got it wrong, because Paul liked to laugh about this years later. And so he kind of rubbed his chin and looked at me and tapped me on the shoulders again. He says, "I think you're okay." I wouldn't want Paul to be my doctor, but anything else I would want Paul to be. So, as you can see, Paul was a special friend. So, when I got a text from Paul, November 12th, 2023, at 8:57 a.m. from his hospital bed, telling me that he had brain cancer, it was a horrible shock. I don't recall if Paul told me, or, you know, I just learned this from furiously Googling glioblastomas. What is this? But from what I could learn, he had 14 months to live, give or take maybe. From talking with Amy and Hannah since then, one doctor actually told me he only had 8 months, way back at the beginning. And as you all know now, he made it to September 10th, just about a month ago, 22 months. I spent a lot of time with Paul in those 22 months. And I can't tell you how much I admired him during that period. Paul had to make very serious choices very quickly. The most important one, obviously, was he decided to get brain surgery. Some doctors were saying, "No, don't do that. Try something different." And some doctors were saying, "Get the surgery." And Paul opted for surgery, I think, as probably everybody here knows. And one of the problems was Paul was fighting with insurance at the time. And, I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but he had one insurance company, and they didn't want to do the surgery or pay for the surgery, so he was trying to get on with another insurance company, and it was complicated. That's complicated when you're healthy. Imagine when you're in the middle of trying to get brain surgery done. And so Paul said, "You know what? I'll just go out of pocket and hope that I win down the road if I have to battle this insurance company, because it's literally life or death. This is what I'm going to do." So Paul's telling me all of this, and of course, as a friend, you hear that and you feel terrible, and you tell him, I wish there was something I could do. There's so many times in that 22 months where you wish there's something you could do. And in his typical Paul fashion, he said, "Well, can you loan me $500,000? Anything else I can do for you, Paul? So what people might not know, and I'm going to apologize now, I don't know if I'm going to be as good as Judge Howard about the time limit here. I will go as quickly as I can. Some people here know to give me the hook if it's too long. So, but I just want to talk a little bit about the surgery, because I don't know if people really know how tough and strong Paul is. Paul was awake during his brain surgery. He had to take some tests before that because his surgery was going to affect the part of his brain that affects his speech. So they did some tests with him and said, look, during your surgery, when you're awake, we're going to talk to you, and we need to hear these kinds of answers from you. So he went through these, dry runs, and then sure enough, during his surgery, he was awake and he was answering questions because they had to know, are we affecting his ability to speak? And that was the only way to do it. I don't know many people who could do that. When Paul told me that just blew me away. And that's how smart Paul is. This guy could pass tests during brain surgery, which again, doesn't surprise me at all for Paul. So after the surgery, as we all know, then comes recovery and chemo. And he had notably less energy. He was slower mentally over time. He was really anxious. He had to get MRIs every couple of months because it took a shot of his brain and told him, how's the cancer doing? Is it growing? Is there more? Is it moving? And he also had to make the gut-wrenching decision, retiring from the job that he loved so much, becoming a judge. Obviously, Judge Howard spoke to that much more than I will or could, but I just know how much he loved it and how hard it was for him to walk away from it. He was actually in the middle of a trial, and he was having difficulty. He walked off the bench, and he never got back on the bench. And that really, really hurt him. And I think everybody here should know who worked with him how much he wanted to return to you and come back to you and keep working with you. And it really bothered him. And he talked about that a lot over that 22-month period. And it was a big loss to him. But he plowed on, and he knew he had another fight that he had to do. So that's what he threw himself into 100%. So, as mentioned, Paul had some difficulty. There were times, especially as it got later on, where, he'd have trouble finding a word or couldn't remember a name or lots of things like that. And he got to a point where he had trouble texting too. He couldn't use his phone that well, and sometimes he would respond, sometimes he wouldn't. So at one point during this process, I got a text from Paul, and it was a beautiful picture of him. And it looked to be in Hawaii because they had just gone to Hawaii. He had told me that. And in big capital letters, it's love you, heart, kissy face, lots of exclamation points. So even I know that's not for me. But I thought, I don't want to upset Paul. So, I'll just let it go. If it keeps happening, maybe I'll tell him or I'll tell Amy and, we can fix it. But I didn't want to upset him. But I happened to be walking with him then, a few weeks later. We took a lot of walks. And so I thought, well, I'll bring it up just to make sure Paul knows and doesn't do this by accident again. So I told him about that, and he just laughed and said, oh, okay, sorry about that. No big deal. And then, because Paul kept his sense of humor, I said, hey, it's a good thing you didn't send me something racy that was meant for Amy. Paul? And he says, yeah, we were laughing. And then all of a sudden he stops. His eyes got a little big, and he looked at me and goes, I haven't done that, have I? I said, no, Paul. And Amy, he didn't. Your texts are between you. I have no idea. So Paul could have been anything other than that. But he could have been an engineer because he could fix anything. And as Paul declined, he lamented about being unable to do things like operate the complicated entertainment system in his home, turn the gas back on if it should go off in an emergency. And he said, I can't remember things. I can't work on the TV. He said, I'm useless. And what he said was, I can't help Amy. And he felt bad. Paul never felt bad for himself, but he felt bad when he felt like he was letting someone else down, which couldn't have been further from the truth. He never let anybody down. But that leads me to Amy, and I want to just say a few words. Paul had many, many family and friends that looked after him during his illness, including Hannah, Kendall, and Nicole. You will hear from Hannah, one of his most devoted caretakers, when she speaks later. But Amy was with Paul every step of the way, and I do mean every. Amy told me that one of the hardest parts was the experience of losing Paul over and over. Meaning one day he might be pretty good, and the next not at all. And you think his mind is gone, Paul's gone. And that you've lost the best part of Paul. And then all of a sudden the next day he would bounce back. And this cycle continues. And it gives you hope, and then without mercy, it dashes that hope. And Amy weathered that storm with Paul, without fail, for 22 months. And it was amazing. You were an amazing best friend, doctor, and wife to Paul. And there's no way he would have lasted 22 months without you. Now, as mentioned, Amy's a doctor. You probably all know that. She's also an artist. Her art graces their home, if you've ever had the fortunate to be in there. It's been publicly exhibited. So Paul, being Paul, he wanted to develop that passion as well and with Amy. So he did some of his own art. And I think there's going to be something up there, but if it's not, there's a picture that's been scrolling through here. Paul created a variety of pieces of art that are in their home still. But one was about a 6-foot model of Coit Tower. Here it is. Paul made that with a 3D printer. He had some kind of contact, some guy in the Ukraine he had to buy paint from or something. I don't even know. But so this is a home of some friends of theirs who I'm sure they're here. And so they had a view of Coit Tower. So Paul made them a model of Coit Tower to put on their deck. This model was so good that when these friends of theirs went to sell this home, the person who bought it said, "I want that." But these friends, being solid friends, said, "No way." So there was a little hiccup in this closing. It was an issue, but they kept it, and it's now in front of their home, and Amy's actually able to see it from her home, and that makes her happy. So towards the end, when we could see Paul starting to deteriorate and it was really starting to accelerate, it got hard to watch. We all know that. He got bad news in March of this year where the MRI showed that there was a third tumor. Amy and Hannah were with him, and he took it hard, as you can imagine. But Paul's attitude was, he knew this was coming at some point, and he kept the fight. On September 6th, I visited Paul just a few days before he passed. And I was with my good friend Todd Emanuel. And luckily, I'm thankful that Amy and Hannah were there as well, because it was the last time I saw him smile. I hadn't seen any emotion or really communication from him in days and before seeing him. And all of a sudden, Todd was trying to actually give him a shave. He was getting a little scruffy there. And so we were laughing about that. And all of a sudden, he had this moment of alertness and life. His eyes lit up, they opened, and he smiled. I don't know if that picture's in this roll or not. But it was amazing, and I'll never forget it. That will stay with me forever, to see that last smile and the reaction that Amy and Hannah were able to have, because they hadn't seen that in many days as well. Paul, that's how he went out with me. Paul's last words to me were, "I love you and thank you," and just for being there that day, just being his friend. He was effusively positive, as Jeff pointed out before. And I like to think that, positive Hawk lasted the longest. It's just my simple-minded theory, but cancer kills slowly, with your strongest attributes, I think, being the hardest for it to kill. Cancer took Paul's sadness, his despair, and his anger first. I'm not saying he never exhibited those emotions. He did, but it was rare. He was never the woe is me type. And he let those negative emotions go because he knew they were a waste of his precious time. But it was truly amazing how positive he stayed to the end. He fought like hell and kept himself alive long after doctors said he would not be. It was an honor to be Paul's friend. I want to leave you with Hawk's words and not mine. I don't think you can know for sure, anyway, how they would act if they were diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. I just think there are certain pairs of shoes in life that you simply can't know what it's like until you've walked in those shoes. But I have to believe that few people would say this. Not long before Hawk died, and knowing full well that his days were numbered, his quality of life was rapidly deteriorating, and there was no hope of a cure. He told Amy, "This illness, while terrible, has been a gift, and that it has allowed me to spend time with people I love.
These attorneys, they're good, they can talk. So, ditto. Is this thing on? My name is Steve Arsenault, and Paul is one of my most cherished friends, and I will miss him immeasurably. And when I went to write what I want to say to you guys about Paul, I wrote 4 pages, and I was looking at it, and it was beginning to look like a biography. And I said, I didn't want to write a biography about Paul. You guys can wait for the movie to come out. I wanted to share just a few stories that I had with Paul that you maybe did not know. Paul and I met at Davis. It was during my last 2 years. He was roommates with some of my lacrosse teammates. And I won't sully his pristine image by telling you old college stories, but I can just let it be known that he was a lot like me. And as soon as I met Paul, I just can tell we were kindred spirits. We were instant friends, and he's friends of a friend, and I just go, well, I like this guy better than the guy I connected with. And so we were both in biosciences. We took classes together. We worked in the same place. We eventually graduated together. And after college, we headed back down to the Bay Area to find our grown-up jobs. And we used my parents' house as our home base. And it was a longer process than we thought it would be, clearly a lot longer than our parents wanted it to be. And to break up the tedious searching for jobs, we would make up a lot of games. And if you knew Paul, you make up games. And these games will evolve. And I'll give you an example. So, trying to find a job, evidently, it's harder than we think. So we said, let's take a break. And so what we would do is we'd take 2 garbage cans and put them on the opposite end of our cul-de-sac and just huck a Nerf football from one side to the other to try to get it inside. And we're always competitive, so we're always keeping score. If it bounces in, it's 2 points, all sorts of just weird things that we got. That evolved to putting one of the garbage cans in the backyard of our house and the other one in the driveway, and then blindly heaving the football over the roof of the house, and the other guy saying, okay, you are 10 feet more to the right, but 5 feet further, and went on. And we did that for a long time, and we actually got it to go in to the garbage cans. So the look on my parents' face when they see 2 20-year-olds, plus-year-olds throwing Nerf footballs over the house, it was priceless. It was like they said, we just wasted all that money to give these 2 knuckleheads, a leg up on everybody else for competition for jobs. Little did they know. If you were one of the lucky people that joined Paul up at the family cabin at Fallen Leaf Lake, you would have seen what that game progressed to. There was a 9-hole Nerf football golf course around the whole cabin. And the pins were, I can remember them all, there was a skip shot into a doghouse that I don't think a dog's been there for I don't know how long. There was a bucket over a horseshoe post. There was the outhouse door, which you had to be very careful because if you missed that, it would go all the way down to the lake. The center of a fallen tree, into a hammock, and then a blind shot over the cabin to a laundry basket in the corner of the back porch. That's how it happened. And I'm gonna let my wife know a little bit about a little secret. At the end of every year, 4 of us would go up to the cabin to winterize it. And we would tell our wives that, Paul needed help to close up the cabin and get his boat out of the water. And I always got permission from my wife because she wouldn't want me to do anything to help out Paul, because I'm pretty sure she liked him more than me. I don't blame her. So I played that card every year. The truth be told, winterizing the cabin consisted of draining the water out of it, pouring a couple cups of water into the toilet, pulling the ping pong table in and putting up some storm shutters, and 20 minutes tops. And for most of the years Paul was up there, Paul had a service that would pick up his boat and store it, so we had nothing to do there. So it was pretty much just an excuse to get up there, go golfing, barbecuing, relaxing on the deck, and getting a few rounds of cabin Nerf golf. So Paul and I are not good golfers, and it never stopped us from trying to get out as often as we could. And we're always competitive. We've always had layers to competition. And what we would do is we'd keep score, the standard score, and we'd also add match play and then tally up junk shots. And golfers will know what those are, but the junk got kind of more creative as years went on. And there was a possibility that you could actually get a leafy, sandy, chippy birdie for 4 points. And Paul did. He hit a shot, hit the leaves of a tree, went into a sand trap. He chipped it out onto the green for a birdie. So that was your leafy, sandy, chippy birdie. The prize at the end of each of these golf tournaments was the right to own this watch that we bought. It was a Tag Heuer. I don't know how to say it exactly, but it was a watch that we co-bought at Costco. And since the most expensive watch we ever owned before that was a Swatch watch, if you guys remember that, I think I just dated that. We thought this tag was pretty fancy, so we got the right to have this watch until the next time somebody else beat each other. And it's always fun to call them up and say, "Hey, Paul, do you know what time it is?" Some of the cases Paul had later on didn't allow too much for golf. I would call him up and see if he could play on a Saturday, and he'd have to say he had to read 4,000 pages of briefs and motions and whatnot. And I go, "God, your job sucks." And the truth is, he loved his job. And one day, I went down to the courtroom to watch him in action. His brother Joe got us tickets to the MLB All-Star game. It was a day game, so I went down there. I stood in the back of his courtroom, and it was small claims, I guess, was going on, and it was so entertaining. At the back, I was doing everything to stifle some laughter, because I was doing everything I could to stifle the laughter, and he was doing everything he could to clear the docket as efficient as he could, so we get done by noon so we could take off. And some of the people there were doing their best long-winded impersonations of Perry Mason to advocate for their side of whatever the case was, and Paul was having none of it. And he says, just brutal facts is what he wanted. And some of these cases were just amusing on their face. And I just kept thinking to myself, this is not that far from a Night Court episode. And if most people don't know about Paul, he was a pretty good magician, just like Harry Anderson was, so it just made it a little bit more funny to me. When Paul was sick, we did numerous walks, just like Jeff did, and with our dogs. And between Paul hollering at Callie to come back here, and me hollering at my dog to stop chasing other dogs, we had a chance to talk a lot. And I guess it's the only decent thing about cancer, is that you get a chance to say goodbye over a longer period of time. We left nothing unsaid, and for that I am very grateful. Towards the end, Paul was outwardly affectionate, and I was something I was used to. And one morning I was cooking breakfast for his family, and he walked up behind me and started rubbing my back. I was chopping up some chives, and he was telling me how much he loved me, and that, I was his best friend ever. And I realized that Paul had to get elected to be a judge, and that made him a bit of a politician. So I'm pretty sure he said the same thing to Jeff the next day. I did everything in my power that day to not start bawling right there, because it was at that time that I knew someday soon I'd be losing one of my best and irreplaceable friends. And that's when the day it hit me right in the stomach. I too want to thank Hannah and Amy, because you girls shouldered everything, especially at the end, and you guys were such rocks. And I'm so glad that you guys took care of my friend. I know having a husband is more important and a father is more important, but he was my friend, and you guys were unbelievable. I want to leave this on a lighter note, and I can kind of do this one by heart because I know this story very well. When I got married, I didn't have an older brother, so I didn't know all these rules that you're not supposed to see the wife's dress. And so my wife told me I can't see the dress, and I go, well then, I'm not going to show you my tuxedo. And so she goes, you better not get one of those t-shirt tuxedo things. Maybe I will. And so we get our tuxedos, and Paul and I kind of come up with this little thing we're going to pull on my wife. And so we all got our tuxedos on, and just the layout of the place we were is that all the girls would come up in limousines, and then they'd have to walk through these doors, and they can't see anything past the doors. And so we knew when they were coming, and Paul was out there kind of directing traffic and showing stuff, and he has one of these light blue, frilly, satin-lined rhinestones, some relic from the 70s when all the guys used to get tuxedos that matched their date's prom dress, and it was hideous. And he was just out there not cracking jokes, just talking, and my wife's in the car with these, he goes, oh my God. You didn't. So then Paul just walks in casual, and then quick change like, Superman in a telephone, and he comes out there and she sees that we're all in classic black and white. So I got her, she's kind of showed you. Well, the following Thanksgiving, Paul was without for whatever reason, and he joined us with my in-laws in Sebastopol, and he asked, Kathy, what's the dress? And Kathy thinks she's got him. She goes, semi-formal. He goes, okay. And of course, Paul and I talk, and I'm never throwing my friend under a bus. Teach my wife a lesson here. So I go, no, Paul, it's not semi-formal. She's just trying to get you back to what you did at the wedding. And he goes, okay. So we show up to the dinner, and we're doing all the pre-stuff, and then I think Paul probably did some magic actually then. It was a one-man show. And so we were getting ready for dinner, and so Paul said, I gotta get dressed. And Kathy's kind of going, and so he comes out, and damn if he didn't come out in that same blue tuxedo. For all this, and Kathy thinks she got him, and goes, never, don't ever get between me and our best friend. And he ate in it because he had, he figured it'd be free cleaning. So that was that. Paul is going to be desperately missed by all of us, I know, and by me especially, not more than anybody else. I would say that it probably would have been better if Paul was to do my memorial, because he would have done a better job. I just would like that to have been when we were late 80s, still shooting our age or something like that in golf, but you'll be missed.
Where's Amy? Just before I get started, I want to say Paul gave me 24/7 access too. I'm Joe, Paul's older brother by 17 months. And these are this is Ann, Chris, and Jennifer, Paul and mine's sisters.
Oh my
Growing up. Thank you all for coming. It's great to see so many people. Not too long ago, Amy mentioned how she was amazed how Paul could maintain so many friendships from throughout different chapters of his life, from high school, college, law school, the courthouse. Yeah, and a lot of you here today, came through to see him in his final days, final weeks, final months, to say hello, say goodbye, tell him how much he meant to you. And it was an impressive group of people, doctors, lawyers, judges, engineers, teachers, summa cum laude this, and mock trial champion that, all with your fancy degrees and titles. But in all honesty, the interaction that I witnessed that most impressed me was any of you all. Paul had just been diagnosed, and I was up here visiting, and we went to the Northgate Shopping Center to get a Jamba Juice. And we get out of the car, we're walking towards the shops, and we see two other men walking from the shops towards us a little bit. And then I noticed they kind of took an angle and started coming directly at us. I was like, what's this about? And then one of the guys, not to prejudge, no pun intended, was honestly kind of scraggly looking. He kind of scraggly hair, scraggly beard, scraggly clothes. And I was like, okay. And then I look at his face, and he looks at Paul, and his face lights up like he saw a movie star or Steph Curry or something like that. And he just at the top of his lungs yells, "Judge Haakenson, Judge Haakenson." He comes running over, and "Judge Haakenson, how are you?" And he says, "I'm great, how are you?" And he doesn't say, "Oh, I have brain cancer." He just says, "How are you doing?" And the guy says, "Oh, I finished rehab, I got a job, I even have a girlfriend, everything's great." And Paul's, "Oh, that's great, keep it up, good job, okay, take care." We go our separate ways, and I said, "What was that about?" And he said, "Oh, he was a defendant in my courtroom, and I put him on a program, and it sounds like he's doing great." I go, that's awesome. And he's like, "Yeah, it's awesome, he's doing great." I go, "No, what you did was awesome." He's like, "No, I was just doing my job. That's what I do. I evaluate the situation, and I give him whatever he needs to move forward in his life." But I'm thinking, it wouldn't be far-fetched to say that he saved this kid's life, because I don't know what his charges were, but it sounded like drugs, and he might have been on the wrong path. And, but for Paul, doing the right thing doesn't deserve any kind of special in his mind. You're supposed to do what you're supposed to do. So where did this character come from? Well, we have our parents, and they're flawed humans like everybody else, but they had their strengths. And with my dad, one of his strengths was fairness. And I remember one time asking for $5 from my dad. And then a few minutes later, one of these guys was running down the hallway saying, "I got $5. And my dad, in the name of fairness, he had to give, if he gave one kid $5, he had to give every kid $5. So, and then what does Paul do? Talk about fairness. He takes fairness and he runs with it. He becomes a judge, which is basically a career or a job that epitomizes the idea of fairness. And then with my mom, her strength was her selflessness. She always put herself last. She put her husband first, her kids, her friends, her animals, the dogs, the cats, the parakeets, Myrtle the turtle, on and on. So that's where he gets some of that stuff. But you all know Paul. Most of you knew him as an adult. So I had the unique experience of him as a kid. In fact, when you spend 18 years sharing a bedroom growing up, you get to know somebody pretty well. So let me say, he was not a saint, okay? But there were signs early on that I look back on now, as him as a kid, things that he did that I was like, wow, that's a pretty good indicator of the man he would become. So I'll tell a story, I think it was 1980, so he would have been 16, I was 18, and the Rams football team were in the playoffs. And they were playing in Anaheim at the time. And the NFL had a rule back then that if the team didn't sell out the stadium, the game was blacked out on local TV. So Sunday morning, I say, Paul, let's just go to the game. So he says, yeah, let's go. So we go to the game, we get in line in the ticket booth, and back then we didn't have debit card, we didn't have credit card, we didn't have Apple Pay, Zelle, anything. We had cash. Get to the front of the line, and it's the playoffs. So guess what? Tickets cost more than bills. So for 2 tickets, we were $20 short. So we step aside, and we're like, what are we gonna do here? And we're standing there, and then we see a guy step away from the ticket booth. He's kind of fumbling around with his wallet and his tickets and his money, and he drops something. So we look at each other, and we go, okay, what's going on? And then the guy eventually walks away. So we slither over there. Well, I slithered, Paul floated. And we go over there, I pick it up, it's a $20 bill. And I'm like, dude, we are going to the game. And he's all, what are you talking about? The guy is right over there, we gotta give him his money back. I go, are you kidding me? We were $20 short, and we found exactly $20. And I go, this is a sign. And then he said, 16-year-old Paul says, that wasn't a sign, that was a test. I'm like, oh, okay, Gandhi, all right. Okay, let's get the tickets. So we go, Gandhi and I get the tickets. We go to the game, we watch the game, the Rams lose. We're leaving the stadium, I'm kind of bummed out. I was a big fan, Paul really didn't care that much. And then he just says, oh, what'd you expect? And I go, what are you talking about? He said, well, we didn't do the right thing. I go, so the Rams lost because we didn't give that guy his $20? And then he says, well, you never know. So eventually we would know. So long story short, the Rams moved to St. Louis. They did win a Super Bowl in St. Louis, but I didn't care. I was not the LA Rams. They moved back to LA, flash forward to 2021, and the Rams are in the playoffs. And I'm like, oh, how are we going to choke this year? I gotta break the curse. And I thought about the $20 bill incident. So I get $20 bill, and I wave it up in the sky, and I say, this is for that guy 40 years ago. I'm gonna put it aside and hold it right here and not spend it, and I'm gonna lift the curse. And guess what? The Rams won the Super Bowl. So 40 years later, Paul was proven right. The lesson being, do the right thing. And Paul, I mean, he was literally a great man, a great husband, a great father, a great brother, a great son, a great friend, and an average golfer. So, and for me personally, I just want to let you know, I really have had a hard time dealing with this. Just accepting the idea that the idea that he's gone, and I just have not been able to get through it. And so I took some time away. I got my Zen on, and I came up with an answer I think that's helped me, and that's that the reason that I can't accept that he's gone is because he's not gone. He's gone physically, but he's not gone spiritually. He's not gone in my heart and in my soul. He's with me. I'm reminded of him every day. I think about him all the time. So I feel him with me. And actually, all of you can keep him in your hearts too by just doing this one thing. Whenever you're faced with a tough decision or a choice you have to make, just ask yourself, what would Paul do? And there's a good chance that you're going to make the right choice. So.
Hi, everyone. For those of you who I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Hannah, and I'm Paul's daughter. I just want to start off by saying thank you so much to each and every single one of you guys for being here tonight. I know it's a Monday night and a rainy night, and it truly means the world to me. I can't say that I'm shocked at how many of you are here tonight, given how incredible my father was, but I'm truly so overwhelmed and grateful. I've been anticipating this day for a very long time now, so to be in this moment in the same room as all of you guys from different phases of my dad's life is the greatest honor, so thank you. I also just wanted to take a minute to thank those who have stood by me, not only in the wake of my father's death, but the last 2 years. They have obviously not been an easy road, and you know, time kind of keeps going for the world, but for us it stops, and you all stopped with me, and I credit my strength to all of you, so thank you. To sum up my dad and what he means to me feels a little bit impossible to do, but if you know me, you know that all I've ever wanted to do is to make my dad proud, so I'm gonna try to do that tonight. My earliest memories involve my dad, like learning to recite the alphabet or learning to count to 10, not only in English, but in Spanish too. Yes, he had me learning Spanish at 1 year old. But there he was, always from the start, pushing me and teaching me and guiding me. The truth is, I knew very early on how special my dad was. In fact, in kindergarten on show and tell day, all of my classmates brought their favorite games and their favorite books and their favorite toys. But me, I brought my dad. I spent my younger years in constant awe of him, constantly boasting about and praising him to everyone around me. I spent many afternoons and evenings alongside him in the courtroom, on the bench, or in the Tamheim mock trial classrooms, just completely enamored by him. His ability to connect with people and really bring the best out in everyone was truly so extraordinary to witness as a child. Not to mention having a dad who could literally do anything was pretty cool. I know, as many of us know, he knew every magic trick in the book, and he could even carve real-life human faces into pumpkins. I don't know anyone else who does that but him. Speaking of pumpkins, holidays were so incredibly special with my dad. He loved the holiday season more than anything, and truly made every single holiday feel so sacred and so special. And you know, as a kid, the magic comes from Santa Claus or comes from the Easter Bunny, but as I got older, I realized that the magic was always him. He wasn't just good at magic tricks, he was magic. I like to tell this story because I feel like it really captures the father that my dad was. But when I was in 5th grade, I had a genealogy project where we were assigned to create a family tree on a poster. And I went home that day and I told my dad about it, and he sat there kind of just thinking to himself, as he normally did, and he looked back at me and he said, "Well, does it have to be on a poster?" And I said, "I don't know, I'll find out." So I went back, my teacher was like, "No, but what do you want to do?" I said, "I don't know." I will just tell you that the next several weeks consisted of the two of us spending very many late nights with a video camera, a script, and a green screen. And he made one of his classic Paul videos with the green screen had Google Earth going back and forth from different origins of where my family was from. And I'll tell you that I'll never forget the look on my teacher's face when I showed up on presentation day while everyone else had a poster. But I tell that story because it truly just defines my dad. He was always pushing me to succeed and to be the best that I could be in everything that I did. And as a daughter, I just could not have asked for anything more. No one could make me smile or laugh as hard as my dad could, and his laugh was truly just the most contagious thing in the world. We spent many summers and holidays driving down to Southern California, just the two of us, to see family, our Haakenson family. And I think in 2008, we were driving down for Thanksgiving, and it just so happened that Taylor Swift's brand new Fearless album had just come out. And I thought, what better way to spend, the 8-hour drive than to listen to the album the whole entire time and memorize the whole thing. And the dad that he was, of course, let me listen to the whole album, the whole 8 hours. And I will just tell you, I was not the only one who had every single song memorized. I'll never forget getting into Huntington and driving down PCH with my dad, and he just starts rolling the windows down and belting at the top of his lungs Love Story by Taylor Swift. And the 10-year-old little me was just beat red with embarrassment. Dad, stop, Dad, stop. But it was followed with so many laughs and smiles, and I think about that moment often because it truly just encapsulates the joy that was my father. As I got older and reached adulthood, I developed such a beautiful relationship with my dad. He was truly my guiding light, and I cherished and valued his advice and opinions more than anything. Just as he was on the bench, he always managed to provide such a logical and level-headed response while also providing such a comforting and safe space for me as I've navigated my adulthood. Although I don't have the privilege of being able to call him at the end of my days anymore and debrief our days together or get the advice that only a father could give, I know that he left me with the kind of wisdom that transcends time, the kind that will continue to guide me and shape me for the rest of my life, even in his physical absence. I'm so grateful that other speakers tonight have touched a little bit on my dad's spirit throughout his illness, because not only is it such a testament to who he was, but it holds so many valuable lessons that I feel like we can all carry with us throughout the rest of our lives, and that's just such a huge part of his legacy. I'll never forget the day he was diagnosed with glioblastoma. Our world was turned upside down within an instant, and nothing made sense. I mean, how could the smartest man we've ever known have tumors growing in his brain that couldn't be cured? But who was right there all along with a big smile on his face and so much hope in his eyes? My dad, Paul Haakenson, right there picking us back up and holding us together and filling us with so much strength. I know Jeff touched a little bit on this earlier, but my dad was originally told that he would only have 8 months to live after his diagnosis, and that brain surgery would probably result in some pretty extreme deficits, including potentially losing the ability to speak. And I'll never forget his reaction after hearing that. He looked at us and he was like, he said with more confidence than I had ever seen in my life, he said, "I'll find a way." The man who was, just diagnosed with brain cancer, was told he needed brain surgery, was willing to go through that and lose the ability to speak, even if it meant to just have 8 more months here. And as Jeff said also, he did live 22 more. Thank you to the incredible doctors and surgeons at UCSF and the beautifully positive attitude of my dad. He came out of a 6-hour awake craniotomy, not only speaking, but profusely thanking his doctors. I'll never forget hearing his voice, literally just an hour out of brain surgery, saying, you guys, these doctors, they're amazing. Can you believe what they did? He's just so incredible. My dad truly kept us laughing through his entire disease and always kept us on our toes. One of the deficits of his tumors was that he often would get words mixed up or forget words. And we actually developed a name for when that happened. We called them Paulisms. And we were able to embrace it every single time it happened thanks to his way of handling it. Us girls, my stepmom and sisters and I, we wear our emotions on our sleeves, and sometimes when he would mix things up, we couldn't really help but to show how perplexed we were on our faces, because quite frankly, it just, what he said wasn't making sense. And every single time, without fail, before we could even respond to him, he would look at us and go, "I was just seeing if you were listening." He truly embraced his deficits and embraced every single moment he had. He accepted his disease from the very start, and he never once felt sorry for himself or complained that this was happening to him. I can't tell you how many times he would tell us how grateful he was that this disease was his. I mean, one of the most deadliest, most aggressive forms of cancer a human being could have, he was grateful for. He was grateful for life, and he was grateful for time. At one of our last visits with his neuro-oncologist, we received the news that it was probably nearing the end and that there was probably not much left that we could do to fight it. And I think Amy and I, we froze in that moment. Our eyes swelled with tears, our throats clogged up. And I just remember looking up and looking at my dad, and he just starts apologizing to his doctor. "I'm so sorry that this is part of your job. I'm so sorry that this is something that you have to do. This must be really hard for you." I mean, the man who was just told he had weeks to months left to live as tumors would take over his brain was sitting there comforting and consoling his doctor. Truly the most remarkable man I will ever know. I loved my dad more than anything. He showed me what unconditional love was. And our bond, I'm so grateful for our bond. It's just unbreakable and extends far beyond the physical world. He lives within me now, in the air that I breathe, in the songs that I sing, in my smiles and in my laughter. Neither time nor distance could keep us apart, and I will carry him with me in my heart forever as he continues to push me and teach me and guide me. Dad, rest now. You completed your mission here on earth. We are all forever better because of you and forever changed without you. You will never ever be forgotten. Thank you for choosing me to be your daughter and for giving me 27 amazing years with the best dad on earth. I love you, and I'll miss you until I see you again. Again, thank you all so much for being here. I hope that you guys can stay if you can. If you can't, that's totally fine. We have some food and drinks. There's a couple bars out here, and there's another bar in the lounge that way. Bathrooms are that way. And love you all. Thank you.